family abolition is about the proliferation of relationships of care, not a kind of destruction of the relationships we already have. Capitalism and capitalist states rely really heavily on the family as a unit of social discipline, social order, austerity, and a source of huge amounts of unpaid labor. In the history of feminism, abolishing the family was, very well known as a demand, particularly in the 60s and 70s amongst certain strands of women's liberation, including Shulamith Firestone's famous The Dialectic of Sex, where she talks about children's liberation and a world in which children and women would have much more autonomy over the households in which they live. It's feminists who have mounted an analysis of the private nuclear household as the site of the overwhelming majority of the rape and abuse that takes place on Earth. Family abolition means that we deserve more. We deserve more than the sort of blackmail that tells us that we must be content with relationships defined as blood or as nature, the relationships we find given to us. It means that we could develop forms of comradeliness, forms of chosen, or in the phrase of the xenofeminists, sort of xenofam. Xenofam can be as good as, at least as good as, relationships of sort of biological or biogenetic nature. So that's one way of thinking about abolition as a process of building and growing all the kind of forms of love and care and solidarity that we do. In the commercial gestational surrogacy industry, a lack of informed consent is rife. There's a terrible lack of autonomy that workers face over their obstetric experiences. There are C-sections forced on people. There is wage skimming, underpayment, surveillance, all kinds of bad working conditions that gestational surrogates are, as workers, naming, resisting, making demands over. So why do I think that you can look at the gestational surrogacy industry, this place sort of dedicated to, the most extreme expressions of proprietarian biogenetic kinship? It's because the workers in that industry have experience of doing unpaid and paid pregnancy, and they have things to say about the difference, or rather the lack of a difference between those two things. To think back to the demands of lesbian feminists, black Marxist feminists, queer feminists from the 80s who were asserting things like all children belong to everyone, or in the phrase of the Sisterhood of Black Single Mothers, children won't belong to patriarchy in the future, and they won't belong to us either. They will belong only to themselves. It's kind of a question of squinting at this dystopia to think about what could come beyond it if we took some of the sort of cracks and fissures in its own logic really seriously and tried to sort of peek through to sort of radically collectivized, pluralized, communized gestational reality to